For pretty much anyone born after the mid-70s, Star Trek feels like something that was always there, on both the small and big screen, looming large, boldly going. But for the first generation to see the show both in its original run and more predominantly in its 70s syndication era, the show left a bittersweet taste. For as beloved as it was, however, definitely dead, having been cancelled in 1969. Its legend was most certainly kept alive by the animated series, but for all intents and purposes, Star Trek was a thing of the past. Imagine then the sheer unadulterated thrill those original fans would have gotten when, against all odds, this thing was resurrected. 1 minute seeming like it would be a TV show again, then a movie, then a show again, then finally a movie. Many credit the success of Star Wars for Paramount's sudden interest in reviving this thing that had been kept dead for a decade, but more likely it was actually the success of Close Encounters which more aptly demonstrated that a high-concept, slowly paced, contemplative sci-fi work could be a hit. Add to that the built-in fanbase and already existent iconography through parodies and the like, Paramount finally saw the potential in Trek. Most people dismissed the resulting movie as overly slow, unengaging, and mired in its own self-importance. Others, generally from that early generation of fans who lined up excitedly in 1979, see it as a pretty damn satisfying big-screen interpretation of a very philosophical, clever TV show which in its day revelled in the unhurried examination of cosmic concepts as opposed to... So who's right? Well, amidst that argument, we do have the tale of two movies, the original compromised theatrical cut and the lovingly crafted director's edition. Not drastically different movies in any sense, but with the latter having just enough of Robert Wise's original vision restored and failed effects shots elevated with a level of CGI restraint not seen in, well, I can't think of any other examples. And whilst the truth may lie somewhere in between the millennials and the baby boomers' contrasting views in this film, I think it definitely leans one way more than the other. The film is a story of finding yourself in the universe, whether that means examining your very existence or remembering who your friends are and just what kind of family you belong with. In a much commented on rethread of the classic episode The Changeling, a gigantic technological lifeform calling itself V'ger is moving through space, destroying things in its path, and headed for Earth. Admiral James T. Kirk, now promoted beyond the adventures and daring do of space exploration, sees to it that he retakes command of his old ship, the Enterprise, on its mission to intercept the... thing.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
And here's where Star Trek fans got treated to their beloved show now being a motion picture with a capital M and capital P. The effects on Star Trek had been state-of-the-art for 1966 television. Modern gobshites might snicker, and let them. They're gobshites, they do not matter. Fast forward a decade and you have the likes of Douglas Trumbull, a veteran of the effects from 2001, and himself director of Silent Running, working with a movie budget, and all the new effects techniques that had been unlocked and let loose on cinema screens in the time since the Star Trek TV show. Now the level of technology and budget that had been available to Kubrick and Lucas was there to put the Enterprise on screen.
Jerry went away, and while we were doing some more work on the film and whatnot, and then he came back with his revised score.
He'd come over to the house and he had a bad day of the special effects, and he says, "I've had a really bad day today." He says, "Nothing's working right. I hope you got good news for me." So I remember the head of the music department at Paramount was there then, and we had rehearsed this, and I had two pianos in the living room, and we played it for him on the two pianos. That's it.
Imagine you were one of the original fans who loved the Enterprise and its sleek Matt Jeffries design, but had only seen it on the small 4:3 ratio cathode tube TV in your mum's living room. That's all it was to you. A 60s TV effect racing across a tiny screen. Until suddenly, no. There she is. Her name's Connie and she's spectacular. Ever heard the term spaceship porn? This is what they're talking about. This gorgeous cinematic level depiction of the most iconic vessel in science fiction. Tweaked, or to be more accurate, refitted by Andrew Probert. Glittering in the lights of dry dock and waiting in hot anticipation for her captain's shuttle to slowly, but surely, dock.
Is it good for you?
I've had better.
Things are uneasy with the crew. Kirk has somewhat dickishly stepped in and taken the Enterprise away from her actual new captain, Proto Riker. And here's where Bones gets to shine. Sometimes our best friends are the ones who don't flinch in telling us exactly how much of an asshole we're being.
The point, Captain, is that it's you who's competing. You ram getting this command down Starfleet's throat.
Engineer, we need warp speed now.
Jim, you're pushing. Your people know their jobs.
When Spock reluctantly comes on board, it still feels awkward. No one's slotting back into their old roles, save for McCoy's constant calling out of Kirk. They've clearly all been on their own journeys since the 5-year mission ended. Kirk getting a promotion he didn't want that took him away from what in a later movie would be described as his first best destiny. Bones was off cultivating a new look. And then Spock, who in trying to go through the Vulcan ritual of Kolinar was trying to purge himself of all emotions. I'd love to know how his mom Amanda feels about this, because that means he was essentially trying to purge himself of the human part of who he is. He failed. And now look where he is. Back amongst the group that most connects him to his humanity. Amongst those, the two friends who always helped him round out the trifecta of human experience. Emotion, logic, and the balance of the previous two.
The Kolinar is also a discipline you broke. To join us. Will you please sit down?
Spock's not happy to be here. Few of them are. Elsewhere in this journey, Proto Riker is joined by Proto Troy. Decker and Ilea's story always could have been better. Aside from their what could have been glances to each other, there isn't much of a sense of what's potentially missing from them as people, of what they could be searching for. These elements seem vital considering how both of their stories finish. Kirk is taught a lesson in humility by Decker, who proves that had Kirk's orders been followed through, the ship would have been destroyed.
You saved the ship.
I'm aware of that, sir.
Stop competing with me, Decker.
Aside from some hostility still existing between the two, we see Kirk begin to cop himself on a bit.
Mr. Decker, I will not provoke an attack. If that order isn't clear enough for you,
Captain is your exec. It's my duty to point out alternatives.
Yes, it is. I stand corrected.
Swallowing his pride and letting some of Bones' advice filter through, actually listening to the crew. Back on the terrifying Goliath of living technology front, the V'ger entity ends up reaching Spock's emotional core through a mind meld, and bam! There's the half-human we've missed. His emotions have risen up to the surface again, and look at that. No burying of feelings of friendship anymore. They're now right there for all to see. We discover that V'ger is an old Earth probe, in fact a fictional member of the Voyager series of probes. It's been somehow evolved, adapted into a greater entity capable of all the hopes, questions and fears a newborn child would have.
As I was when I came aboard. So is V'ger now. Empty, incomplete, and searching. Logic and knowledge are not enough.
The one thing it does know is that it came from Earth, and that is therefore where it seeks its answers. If no answers are found, the consequences could be deadly for the whole planet. But this is Star Trek, and that means... No! That means through understanding and communication, lives can be saved, and perhaps in this case, a new consciousness achieved. I have problems with how Decker and Ilea's storyline finishes up, mainly, as I said before, because I don't feel enough is done early in the story to make this feel thematically satisfying. I don't get a sense of the journey that either of them are on, and therefore don't see how this final result brings anything to a close. Other than Decker and Ilea end up together, sort of, maybe, possibly, not really.
Did we just see the beginning of a new life form?
Yes, Captain. We witnessed the birth.
The director's edition is the better film, full stop. It's the one I'd recommend. As of April 2020, it is only available in standard definition, but apparently a HD release is in the works. Until then, viewers are faced with the unpleasant choice of watching the theatrical release, which isn't as good a film, but is available in Sublime HD, or the director's edition, which is a much better version of the film, but sadly in muddy standard definition. The restraint in the use of CGI needs to be applauded. Coming only a couple of years after the jarring excess of shoving CGI into original footage from Star Wars, Here they made sure not to go for any visual that couldn't have been achieved back in 1978, making CGI look like models in some cases. It works. The two biggest, most special edition-y feeling moments of CGI are only used where the effects from the theatrical release really let it down. The first is Vulcan. Does Vulcan have an atmosphere? Why are we looking at space? Shouldn't it look more like it did in Amok Time? Aha! Fixed. Statues look cool too. The second then is the Giant's Causeway basalt-style steps V'ger summons into existence to aid our heroes in leaving the Enterprise and walking out to make contact. Big improvement. These are the two moments most arguably obvious as being CGI, but even then, nowhere near the over-the-top misplaced antics of swinging Jawas and song and dance numbers from Jabba's palace. So overall, I think there's a nugget of truth in what the film's critics say. This was effectively a script for a pilot for a new Trek show, which got padded out and rushed into production as a movie. Overall, the people involved did their jobs masterfully, getting it in under the wire as an unforgiving, short-sighted studio demanded unreasonable goals from the filmmakers. As it happens, director Robert Wise is said to have arrived at the film's premiere with the film print itself in tow. Things like this, and the movie itself managing to be a hit, shows that the movie god may just have been with Star Trek.
The movie god plays a role in it.
Especially considering what would happen next. Sadly, the kicking that the motion picture would take over the next few years began right away. Upset at some of his better lines being cut out of the movie, Leonard Nimoy immediately started decrying the film as a disappointment. This only emboldened critics to double down on the view that the film was too slow and not actiony enough. Yes, Captain Kirk kicked large amounts of ass in his early days, but people act as if that's all that happened. Star Trek posed big sci-fi questions and took its time in exploring them. In that sense, the motion picture is the truest of all 10 films, the most faithful in adapting the themes and style of the show to the cinema screen. Were a lot of the movie's ideas informed by the fact that, in the intervening years since the show, Gene Roddenberry had started to believe his own press at conventions where he was praised as the great bird of the galaxy and a herald of times to come where we'd renounce greed, violence and pettiness? Yes, and that's a good thing. They were the ideas of a bold, liberal mind who was the progenitor of everything we love about Star Trek, and worth listening to. Did it help when upstarts and rebels injected their own ideas in there too? Yep. Conflicting ideas about what something should be can make for great art, once a balance can be achieved between the two. Cinema is the ultimate collaborative art. And brother, the folks who collaborated on this one were the best.